Yeah. Okay. Thank you for coming today. Welcome to They Never Trained Me on That, Tips for Navigating Grant Research, Submissions, Management, and Reporting. It is my privilege to introduce our speakers today. Sophia McGuire is the Deputy Clerk of Council for the City of Gahanna, where she manages the city's Archives and Records Management Program. She has a decade of experience working with local government records and archives, including city and county government. She has carried out 2 ORAB grant projects and recently served as a reviewer for the NHPRC. Sophia currently serves as treasurer for SOA, as local government representative on the McGuire Board of Directors, and chairs the records management section of SAA. Christopher Harter is the university archivist and head of the Archives and Rare Books Library at the University of Cincinnati. He has over 27 years of experience as an archivist librarian and has worked at the Indiana Historical Society, University of Indiana Bloomington, the University of Illinois, and at the Amistad Research Center in New Orleans. He has authored and served as project director on a number of grants, both large and small, since 2007. Please welcome our speakers today.
Hi, everyone. Sophia here. So I am going to, Chris and I will introduce ourselves a little bit more in our experience with grants. And then I'm going to talk about the application process as well as managing grants. And Chris is going to dive in a little bit more into the reporting and reviewing components. If I can get our slides to switch. All right, so to start out, again, my name is Sophia McGuire. I work for the City of Gahanna. As the Deputy Clerk of Council, you might not think that my role involves records and archives. However, I've been working with local government records for about 10 years, as well as for a year with a religious nonprofit. I have been awarded, well, I've applied for, and on behalf of the organizations that I work for, was awarded 2 ORAB grant projects. First in Licking County in 2019. That was a project that involved cleaning and indexing courthouse attic records that had been sitting in our courthouse attic for over 100 years. They were filthy. There were dead animals involved and all kinds of nasty things. So we cleaned records, permanently valuable records per Ohio Revised Code and our records retention, and made a list of them accessible and made them more publicly accessible. So, and then in just this past year, 2004, we were awarded an ORAB grant at the City of Gahanna in order to digitize and make accessible our village council records from prior to when Gahanna became a city, and those dated back to 1881. Also, in the last few months, I had the opportunity to serve as a reviewer for the NHPRC. Over the last few months, things have also gotten a little strange there. I don't know whether or not the grants that the applications that we reviewed will end up being awarded, but we'll kind of see how that goes. Chris, would you like to share a little bit about your experience?
Sure. Thank you, Sophia. And I'm assuming everybody can hear me okay and such. So thank you. First of all, thank you to Sophia and thank you to Society of Ohio Archivists for being able to accommodate me not being there in Toledo. That wasn't our original way we wanted to do this, but thank you for that. So yeah, as my introduction said, I'm currently at the University of Cincinnati, have been there for about 2 years now. And really with the kind of discussion and the theme of this particular meeting and conference, it's actually an interesting time to dovetail into my time at UC, where we are really looking at, from the library's perspective and the archives perspectives, of thinking about or re-envisioning fundraising and grant writing and advocacy for the library systems at UC. But prior to that, for about 17 years, I worked at a nonprofit independent archives down in New Orleans, the Amistad Research Center. I was probably like many folks, and this is kind of the topic or the theme that Sophia and I came up with, I came into a position of writing grants with no training whatsoever. There were no courses on this. There was no classes on this. So it was really kind of a jumping in hip deep into supporting a nonprofit archive. And over those courses, as I say here, I've been involved with 20 plus, probably reality, it's more like 30, 35 grants if I include all the small ones. This was at an institution that did not have a development officer. We didn't have an office of research. It was pretty much the archivists and the librarians developing a very robust grants writing program. Everything from the IMLSs and the NHPRCs to local foundations, Clear, Mellon, and others. That none of us ever came into our positions at that institution with any grant training whatsoever. But we were able to develop, and those of us who gained experience started training new staff as they came in. As I often say, if I never write another grant in my life, I will die a happy man. But I know that that's not going to be the case. But all that grant writing actually gave me the opportunity to then work with IMLS as a grant reviewer on a number of funding programs. To kind of see the other side of it, of the grant writing. And so that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. Hopefully share some good insight. I think we're going to be kind of repeating some of the things we've heard, but, think of it this way. We're going to be kind of putting an exclamation point on some of the things that have been heard over the past couple of days. So we look forward to sharing those.
Sorry, trying to make it so everyone here can see Chris when he talks.
I'm not sure I would advocate for that, but okay.
Well, I can't find the controls that let me turn this little button off. So we might just leave with it. All right, okay.
Michelle, now I can't see the thing.
Sorry, everyone.
No, where are we at?
Okay, let's try this again. Zoom. Okay. It's moving,
All right.
but not adjusting what you see. Let's just try. All right, when in doubt, just start over.
Okay.
And then we just have to share. Zoom. We didn't hit share. Why is it so?
You have to go into Zoom to do the share screen.
That's what I'm trying to do. Because I bring him up.
And then
Okay.
right there. There we go. Yeah. That one. So, okay. We're good. There we go. All right. All right. Fantastic. We're back. Okay. So like Chris said, I think that if you've been watching and, either in person or virtual for the last couple of days, we're probably going to reiterate some of the things that have already been said. I think that maybe drives home the importance of them. But we also have very different experience. My experience is much more limited than Chris's. I've been working strictly in local government records and using grant funds for projects to promote local government records and preserve them. And so, again, we've got different experience there. The first step, I think, in the application process is going to be finding the grant that suits your needs. Many different options have been shared over the last couple of days. I specifically have applied for ORAB grants, the Ohio Historical Records Advisory Board grants, which, if you're not familiar with those, they're kind of the state arm of the NHPRC, or the re-grant program. And those have been incredibly useful for us in local government, especially. Local government records are kind of unique in that we have certain requirements through whether the Ohio Revised Code or our local records commissions and our retention schedules, where we have to keep things permanently forever. I mean, permanent forever. So those have been, that's been a justification for me to apply for a certain grant opportunities through ORAB, identifying, those records that we need to keep and why we're accessing them, or why we're preserving them, digitizing, cleaning, so on and so forth. I think it's also really important that you have a clear end product in mind, whether that is a finding aid, cataloging records, or digitizing and providing online images, or an in-person exhibit, or a digital exhibit. A lot of grants want, what I'm seeing in a lot of grant applications in the application packages is the requirement that something be made available online for people to use after you're done with the project. And in one case, it was a list of records that we had cleaned and provided access to. In another case, it was digitized images, our meeting minutes from going back to the 1880s that were then made available online. It's also very important that you set a reasonable timeline, which I've missed the mark on. Most recently, I think I missed the mark on our timeline with our most recent ORAB grant. It can be challenging when it comes to staff time, figuring out how to carry out the work, how much time that's going to take. And so what I like to do is to kind of sample a little bit of the work that needs to be done so that you can better estimate the rest of the project. You can multiply it on a larger scale. But you also have to think about whether training needs to be done and whether you don't know if there are any unexpected issues that will pop up, but always allow yourself a little bit of time for that. In this most recent grant project that we worked on, we had an intern assisting us, and we were having books digitized. They were handwritten meeting minutes, ordinances, and resolutions for our local government, again, going back over 100 years. And the best option for us was to put them into a system that we already had. We don't have a digital repository exactly, because we're a local government and I work in a council office. We have legislative software that we then use. We share all of our meeting minutes and whatnot online. And so we had to train our intern to use the software to create the meeting minutes in the system so that then we could upload them and make them accessible. And it sounds really simple, but make sure that you're using the most up-to-date forms and that you're filling out the application in its entirety. speaking a little bit from the reviewer perspective, I don't want to dive too much into that because Chris will get into more perspectives from the reviewer's angle. But my most recent time serving as a reviewer for the NHPRC, we unfortunately had to reject an application. It should have been rejected before it made it to us. But our panel went to review and we kind of caught that something was submitted as a Word document, whereas everything else had been submitted as a PDF. And the head of the panel said, that should never have made it to you. We need to take this out of consideration. And so it was a simple mistake of using a Word document instead of a PDF. It seems harmless, but it did not meet the requirements of the application. And so that was automatically rejected. You don't want to miss a great opportunity simply because you made a seemingly minor mistake. I also would recommend finding ways to collaborate. That might be inside your organization or with external parties. Again, from the reviewer's perspective, something I noticed in reviewing applications is the strongest ones really had this vision of collaboration with maybe their communications department or a local university, working with student volunteers or interns, or working with a local historical society. And from my experience as an awardee of grants, what I try to work into our applications is working like with our communications department. How are we going to connect with them to share information on social media? What are some ideas? How can we carry the grant or carry the project beyond just the grant opportunity once that ends? In particular, this digitization project that we just did for the city of Gahanna, one component of that I want to carry on, the grant project is now over, but I would like to work with our local senior center, who's a branch of our local government, so that we can transcribe these handwritten meeting minutes from the 1880s, because I think we have a really great community between our senior center and our historical society. We have a lot of people interested in projects like that. And so how can we collaborate with them? And mentioning that in the application, that what are the possibilities beyond what you're just trying to do with these grant funds? And so once you've been awarded a grant, very important to not get lost in the weeds and the things that come up, and to stick to the goals, that kind of one end product that you're working on. I found it easy to get distracted by the different things that come up, because you never know what you're going to find. In particular, thinking about cleaning historical records that we pulled from our courthouse attic in Licking County. We very specifically were wanting to preserve the permanently valuable records. We didn't want to get caught up with all the other things. But we had specific departments in mind. And so I had to kind of, hone in only on those and not get lost trying to think about all the cool things that I could do with all the other records that we were finding. And providing regular updates helps to keep you accountable. That might be part of your reporting requirements. There are a lot of grants that require maybe an interim report. ORAB is one of those. And also posting on social media or working with your communications department. Again, I speak again from a local government perspective. I know that that's not everyone's perspective, but this is a great time for advocacy. So working to get the information out is really important. And that also continues to, update your stakeholders. One example with the most recent grant that I worked on, I attended a city council meeting and to report to my city council on where we were at in the process, whether that's your county commissioners, a dean, whoever you report to, checking in with them. A great time to do it is when you need to do that interim report. And that, once again, helps keeps you accountable, but keeps the timeline flowing. A tool that might be helpful for some people is a Gantt chart. There are many tools available to help you stay on task. I, in particular, I plan things out ahead of time, and sometimes things, other things pop up. And sometimes the project goals kind of get pushed to the back burner a little bit. And something I started doing was marking on my calendar exactly when items needed to be turned in well in advance. So like at the beginning of the project, I would mark out when I needed to have my interim report done, when we were going to try to work with communications to post on social media, when I needed to start wrapping up the grant, and when I needed to start working on my final report. And I'm going to turn things over to Chris now. Let me mute myself here.
No, can everybody hear me again? So, great. So, well, thank you, Sophia. And yeah, I wanted to pick up on a reporting, and this is something that Sophia touched on in the management portion, but reporting on the progress and specifically reporting to your funder is not only an incredibly important part of grants management, but it's often a requirement for the grant. When you're awarded a grant, you may negotiate or you may have to finalize what are the performance objectives for this grant for it to be considered successful in the funder's eyes. And part of that often is submitting grants or reports on a timely basis. Not only your final report that you may do at the end of the grant cycle, but oftentimes, depending on the length of the grant cycle, you may also have interim reports that are done. And those often include both a narrative portion and a financial portion. So for example, University of Cincinnati right now, we're working on an NHPRC grant. It's a 12-month project. We just submitted our 6-month interim reports. That one was just a narrative report. We didn't have to do a financial report. But knowing, when you start those grants, as Sophia said, calendar your grant reporting due dates and make sure you're aware of when those are and give yourself enough time to prepare those, especially if you're with an institution that may have a development office or an office of research that helps coordinate funding. Knowing also internally what your internal deadlines are if you need to collaborate with a different department. So for example, if you have a report that's due May 30th, you may need to coordinate internally. When do you need to get information, or when do you want to get financial information from a development office so that you can have everything prepared to report to that or meet that May 30th deadline for the funder. So calendaring those Gantt charts saved my life on a couple grants. Those are really helpful to make the reporting go smoothly along with the management as well. For your final report, and much as if you are submitting or preparing your application, follow the guidelines that the funder may provide you. So they may want to know, where are you at in this grant project? What has been accomplished during this time? What has been unexpected outcomes? But also what are some of your challenges have been? And that's really something I would stress. And Sophia said this, don't wait until your report to communicate to your funder. Find ways that you can keep up to date with them and let them know kind of what's happening, especially if you have had a challenge come up. And if you worked on a grant, you know that you're going to have some kind of challenge come up. If you were working on a grant during the pandemic, you know that everybody's work plans and reporting went out the window. So if you are seeing challenges or something has come up, you want to make sure that you're communicating that with the funder and don't surprise them with that, just mentioning it in a report. Being able to kind of share the numbers, what is it that you've accomplished? Oftentimes the reporting has both a qualitative and a quantitative aspect to it. But as part of that grant management, you're going to be keeping track of where are we progressing in our work plan that we had to often submit as part of the application. You're going to want to report that. So how many images were scanned? How many items have been cataloged? How many, curricular programs have been developed to let them know. So again, an example of the current grant at University of Cincinnati, 12-month grant. First quarter was going to be kind of getting the project up and running, hiring, training, getting things started. Our second quarter was, we said we were going to have processed 40% of this collection. Third quarter, 80%. Fourth quarter, wrapping up the processing, creating the finding aid, and doing programming. And so when we did that 6-month report, we were able to say, here's how many linear feet we have done. We've reached, in fact, we were happy to say we've actually ahead of schedule a little bit. So being able to say, kind of concretely where are we at in the work plan is going to help the funding agency and your program officer to be able to say, okay, they're on track. Things are going well. Things are progressing as we thought they would. Screenshots, providing publicity for funders. This is important for funders because one thing to often realize is many of these grants are re-grants. So the funder has received money from another source. They're providing it then down the line. So for example, CLEAR has had a long history with getting support from the Mellon Foundation. IMLS, NEH, we know those are appropriations, and so that's getting from the federal government. They have to often report back up. So as much information as we as the grantees can provide them, social media posts and interactions, copies of news releases, that's information that they're going to be able to take not only to showcase the great work that they're doing, and obviously funders want to be able to say, we've been able to, see what this great work that we've been able to support. But it also helps their reporting process up the line. And this really is an opportunity to hype your project. What's the good work that you're doing? Don't be shy about sharing that and spreading the good word, but also with your reporting, it is that time to address any challenges. And oftentimes with the reports, that's one of the questions that will be asked as part of your reporting. What challenges have you encountered and how have you dealt with those? So that's your opportunity to say, I think as Sophia said, kind of maybe not realizing the rate of the progress that we thought we were going to make, we've had to adjust that. But in your formal reports, you can say, we've reached out to our program officer, we had this discussion, and we've proposed these changes going forward to kind of self-correct on that. Really, with reporting, I often say brevity is the best. These do not have to be long reports. In fact, more and more funders are actually going to more of a reporting platform where you're providing some basic information, and it may be, discuss the challenges you've encountered, 250 words. So you're kind of fitting that in there. The narrative that you wrote for the grant is probably going to be far longer than the reports that you're submitting. Maybe not your final grant, but at least your interim reports. You want to kind of keep it short, brief, hit the high points, and then the funders can come back with any questions that they may have based on what they've seen in your reports. Talk a little bit about kind of the view of all this from a reviewer's perspective. So as Sophia and I both said we've had the great privilege to be able to serve as reviewers on a particular grant. So I wanted to start off just with some general tips of what reviewers, kind of some things to think about from a reviewer's perspective. For those of you who are new to grant writing, as much as preparing and submitting grants can be daunting, the question of how is my grant submission going to be evaluated can be equally as mystifying. And so a couple general tips that will enhance the likelihood of success for a review and a successful application. Again, refer to the guidelines when building your application and narrative as well. If there's a suggested format or there's guidelines for completing your narrative, follow it by all means. If there are suggested questions to answer them and do it in that order. Oftentimes, reviewers are looking at a number of applications, and we often come in being familiar with what these grants should look like. And so we can, if it's kind of in that general design, it helps with the review process. If there is an opportunity to submit a draft for feedback, I know NHPRC was doing that. By all means, if you can do that, please do it. It's a great way to get feedback to know, are we on the right track with what we're thinking about this particular application? One of the questions I've sometimes been asked is, how complete does the draft have to be? I often say, make it as complete as you can, but this is not going to be your final. You want to give enough of a draft for that the funding agency to give you quality feedback on it. So don't send them, 3 paragraphs that said, we're thinking about doing this. That's not going to do anybody any good. But if you have something that pretty much drafts out, and maybe you've got some things here, maybe you even have some questions that you can ask as part of that draft process. To be able to get that feedback can be invaluable and can really help things going forward. Grant submissions go through often multiple rounds and different types of reviewers. So there may be field reviewers who simply receive a packet of submissions. They're kind of the first round. Does this meet the qualifications? Does this look like it's built for success? Those reviews are often compiled and then sent to a second round of reviewers, the panel reviewers, who often get together in person and kind of really get into the nuts and bolts. And that's the, often then that's not necessarily the final recommendation, but the final recommendation to go to the person who's ultimately going to make the decision on these grants. So these are going to be seen by multiple people. Resubmitting grants. This is a question I'm often asked. When you receive word on an application, whether it's successful or not successful, if you can request the reviewer's comments, do so. That's, again, a great way to get feedback. There's often nothing prohibiting you from resubmitting in the next round, and those reviewers' comments can be invaluable to know, okay, we're on the right track, but maybe there was a few things here we could rethink. Reviewers' comments are going to go from incredibly helpful and enlightening to infuriating to baffling at times. So I wrote a grant once in my previous institution, and it was to fund an upgrade of our microfilm machines, the old printer type to digital scanners and readers. It was a pretty simple grant process. We identified a grant that we thought fit this perfectly. It wasn't processing, it wasn't programming and outreach. It was allowing us to buy new equipment. We submitted, we were unsuccessful. We got reviews back from 3 reviewers. 2 of the 3 gave us 9s out of 10s. One of them specifically said, this is the exact type of application that fits with this program. Reviewer number 3 gave us a 2 out of 10 and said, I'm not sure why this grant was submitted. It does not fit this program at all. It's the only time I've ever gone back to a funder and said, can you explain these reviews to me? But we simply took that information. The next cycle we resubmitted. We talked about, do we consider this anomaly reviewers' comments, or do we just disregard that and resubmit? We tweaked it. We resubmitted. Next year, we were able to receive the funding to do those. We're getting short of time. Just a couple brief things on what reviewers are looking for. I think, Sophia, yeah, just go ahead and run them out. Clarity of narrative and format, much like with the reporting. If you're following the notice of funding opportunity or the grant guidelines, follow those as closely as possible. That's really going to help with reviewers so that they can kind of see what they're looking for. Matching institutional capacity. Does this look like the work plan and a grant that's going to fit with what this institution is capable of doing? If you're a loan archivist and you write a grant that says, in 6 months, we're going to completely process all of our collections and digitize them, it's going to raise some questions to reviewers. Are they capable of doing this? Do they have the capacity to be able to do this? Realistic budget, again, much the same. Is this budget realistic? Is what they're asking for work? If they're asking for equipment, is there evidence that they've gotten quotes for it? Time of staff time, how is that budgeted in as well? But really one of the main things, and Sophia touched base on this briefly, is reviewers are often looking for, with this funding support, is this project going to be sustainable beyond the life of the grant and the grant cycle? And part of that comes from your reporting. You can say, you're building this into your application that with this funding, we then plan to, or we hope to, and kind of piggyback off of that. That's going to show that this isn't kind of a one and done, that there is going to be a life for this funding support to see it move forward. So the one thing I will end with, reviewers are human. Much as the example I get, you're gonna have questions about things, but as much as you can communicate with the funder as part of the application process, as part of the reviewing and any reviews that you get, that's going to go a long way to help you develop a successful grant program. So, and at that, I think we'll turn it over to any questions that folks have.
We don't have questions. I will just share one little aside. In thinking about what projects you might have, if you're thinking about whether or not to go for a grant, if you're in a small institution, ORAB again is a fantastic resource. I know the History Fund is as well. The 2 grants that I carried out both started from major places of inconvenience. And by that, I mean, I had this big room full of really dirty, gross records that something needed to be done with. And we did not initially, like in the most recent budget cycle, plan for that project, but it needed to be done. And so that was the first grant that we applied for was for the equipment specifically. It was the equipment that we needed to clean the records and to rehouse them. And so then, you know, that turned into something bigger, something that we could share a list of what we've done and kind of hype it up. And we worked with the county commissioners on like a bunch of videos on Facebook, and here's how we're cleaning these records. And it turned into a bigger thing than just this big room of dirty records. The second one, the most recent one at City of Gahanna, came about because we had all these meeting minutes, ordinances, resolutions from our village council that they were stored off-site. They had been microfilmed at some point. The microfilm was then digitized. And when poor quality microfilm is digitized, you're just creating poor quality images that were handwritten to begin with. So you couldn't even read anything that, you know, was on this digitized microfilm. And so we decided to turn it into a bigger thing. Okay, we need to be able to use these to research, and we also want to make them publicly accessible. And so we pulled the records from storage, had them professionally digitized, and put them into our existing software. So if you're thinking about a project, but you're not sure maybe how to turn it into something like really concise that you can tie a nice bow on it, think about what is the biggest pain in your butt right now that you can like pull and do something with. That would just be my closing suggestion.
Yeah, I think you touch on an important aspect, Sophia, is because I think somebody mentioned this earlier. It's like this daunting nature of how do I start? I've never written a grant before. Start small. Start with that small little thing that you think is going to be a success. Where I worked before, we wanted to tackle our audio visual. So we started with a CAP assessment. Somebody came in, gave us information, gave us steps to begin inventorying. We received a grant to hire a student to begin inventorying our audiovisual. That then led to National Park Service to focus on one important part of the collection. And then that developed into a much larger grant, and this was over a series of years to hire an audiovisual archivist who then we were able to kind of, keep that funding going until we could build that into a permanent line. So start small. If it's that inconvenient thing right in front of you or that pressing need, those are good ways to start.
We've got someone in the audience with a question.
Yeah, I'll ask a question, and maybe based on one of the things that Chris mentioned. I love the idea of applying for equipment grants, like a new scanner or something. So that also, then I wonder, how do you make that sustainable? Like, we didn't have money for this time, but then how do you, I can understand articulating how you're making access to sustainable, but all like when you're applying for things that have a kind of lifespan themselves, where how do you make it sort of seem like you're not just asking for money that you should otherwise have to operate? Does that make sense?
I think so. Chris, did you hear that?
And I think I understand. I think I was able to understand. So how do you ask for like equipment, money that you should already have in your budget? How do you make that sustainable? What we did was part of our argument was this is not just buying new equipment. It is enhancing access to our collections. That was kind of the hook that we used, that this was going to allow us to, I remember we had discussions about this, especially after that first reviewer, and we basically put as we're not just buying it, but this is a way for us to enhance access, much as if we'd be asking for supplies to process an archival collection. You're doing that to enhance access. We made the justification of because, and one of the reasons was our most heavily used single item was an African-American newspaper from New Orleans, that we had the largest run in hard copy and in microfilm. People were coming in daily to use that. That kind of became our hook, that this is such an important collection. But in today's day and age, people just printing out copies is not working. Oftentimes we'd have to print something and then digitize that photocopy to be able to make it available, something like that. We were able to make that justification. Second time it worked, so.
There's nothing else. I think we're at time. So thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Chris.